In 1985, a grandmother in Greenville, Mississippi, was rendering pork fat into a tin behind her stove. The same year, a Harvard bulletin told her the fat would kill her. She kept rendering. She fed her grandchildren the same fried chicken she had fed her own children for 30 years. Number 18 was labeled dangerous in the 1992 USDA pyramid. By 2015, researchers were calling it one of the most nutrient-dense foods on a southern table. Number 6 fell out of favor in the low-fat era. Today, scientists study it for gut repair. What most people forget is that these 25 recipes were not unhealthy. They were the original whole food cooking, dismissed in one decade and rediscovered the next. Hit subscribe. Here are the 25 banned soul food recipes doctors now admit were actually healthy. Number 25, lard fried chicken. A cast iron skillet on a wood stove in Greenville, Mississippi, holding 3 inches of pork fat the grandmother had rendered herself from a shoulder trim that morning. She strained it through cheesecloth into a tin she kept behind the stove, the same tin her own mother had used. The thighs went in skin down, sizzling so loud she could not hear the radio. She fried them slow, never rushed, until the skin shattered like glass when you bit into it. The kitchen smelled like sizzle and smoke and Sunday afternoon. On Sundays after church, the family ate it standing in the kitchen because there were not enough chairs and nobody minded. Then, in 1977, a Senate report told her to stop. Lard was the new enemy. Switch to soybean oil, cottonseed oil. Anything but the fat that had fed her people through 2 world wars. She didn't switch. By the time researchers in 2010 admitted lard had no real link to heart disease, she had been gone 12 years. Her recipe was already in her granddaughter's hand. Number 24, crackling cornbread. The skillet came out of the oven roaring, the crust cracked open over a layer of crisp pork bits that had been pressed into stone ground cornmeal an hour before. A cook in Tuscaloosa would save the cracklings from rendering lard, never throw them out, and fold them cold into the batter so they kept their crunch through the bake. The bread sat on the table beside greens and a pot of beans. Children grabbed it before the grown folks sat down. For decades, 1990s, dietitians counted only the fat grams and called the bread dangerous. They did not count the corn. They did not count the pork skin, which is roughly 30% collagen. They did not count the way a child finished a plate when there was a slab of crackling bread on it. Today, the same cracklings sit on the shelves of your local health food store for $14 a bag. The skillet always knew. The chart took 30 years to catch up. Number 23, hog jowl with greens. The cured cheek of the pig went into a heavy iron pot at first light, covered with water, and did not come off the stove until afternoon. A cook in rural Virginia layered collard leaves on top, stem side down, and watched the fat slowly melt through the green. The pot smoked low for hours. The kitchen smelled of pork and earth and wood smoke. Edna Lewis, born in Freetown, Virginia, in 1916, wrote about this dish in 1976 the way other people write about prayer. She kept cooking it until she passed in 2006. Her recipe outlived the entire low-fat decade. Doctors warned against jowl meat through every one of those years. What the warnings missed is that the fat was not contaminating the leaf. The fat was the reason your body could pull the iron out of the leaf at all. Your great-grandmother in 1958 knew this without a single chart. She just watched her grandchildren grow. Number 22, salt pork seasoning meat. A working mother in Birmingham in 1934 walked into the corner store with 35 cents, walked out with a piece of cured pork the size of a deck of cards, and fed 7 people from it that night. She dropped it into a pot of pinto beans before sunrise and let the cure work its way through the broth all morning. By supper time, the beans tasted like they had been seasoned by a chef. Vertimai Smart Grosvenor, the Gula cook and writer, called this kind of seasoning meat the thing that taught beans how to taste. She wrote about it in 1970, defending the practice against the 1977 Senate committee that singled out cured pork as a target. The committee ate at hotels. The mother in Birmingham ate at her own kitchen table. She fed her 7 people protein and fiber and fat in a balance a 2025 sports dietitian would still recommend. She didn't call it a balance. She called it making it to Friday. Number 21, bacon grease biscuits. A small tin sat on the back shelf above every southern stove, half full of cold-saved bacon fat from breakfast. A cook in Mobile would scoop a teaspoon out with a butter knife, cut it into self-rising flour with a fork, and roll the dough out on the counter dusted with cornmeal. The biscuits went into a hot oven at 425 and came out 15 minutes later with tops cracked open. The fat carried vitamin A and vitamin D and vitamin K straight into a bite of bread. The 1990s fat-free era pushed margarine onto every supermarket shelf instead. By 2015, the FDA pulled those same hydrogenated oils off the shelves because the trans fats were killing people. The bacon grease tin, meanwhile, sat undisturbed on the same shelf for 40 years. Her biscuits kept rising. The food authorities, who told her to throw the tin out, had to come back and admit the replacement was worse than the thing they replaced. Number 20, Potlikker from collards. A heavy iron pot full of dark green leaves, a smoked turkey wing at the bottom, water to cover, simmered 3 hours until the leaves had given up everything they had. The broth at the bottom of that pot was nearly black, slick with fat and soft with iron. A cook in Charleston ladled it into a coffee mug and drank it standing at the stove. Children sopped it up with cornbread. Nobody threw a single drop away. Most of the soluble vitamins and minerals from the greens leach into that liquid, more vitamin K in 1 cup than your daily multivitamin used to deliver. White nutritionists in the 1970s called it pot juice and threw it down the drain. Black households strained it and saved it. They were right. They were right about the leaves, right about the broth, and right about every warning that told them to stop. The same cup she drank from a mason jar in 1962 now sells in Brooklyn juice bars for $9. Number 19, turnip greens with stems. The pot took the whole plant, the leafy tops, the bitter stems, the small white roots, all of it together in a heavy iron pot with smoked meat and a splash of cider vinegar at the end. A cook in Tuskegee in 1955 stood over that pot for hours, lifting the lid every so often, adjusting the heat with the air vent on the wood stove. She didn't have a peer-reviewed paper to wave around. She had a heavy pot, a smoked turkey wing, and 40 years of doing it the way her mother did it. The 1985 dietary climate told families to skip greens cooked in fat and reach for raw salads instead. What that advice missed is that the fat is what unlocks the carotenoids in the leaf. The pot in Tuskegee already knew. It had been doing the work for centuries, and it kept working the day the chart was published, and it kept working the day the chart was retired. Number 18, mustard greens with vinegar. A cook in Macon in 1962 finished her pot the same way her own mother had finished it in 1898. She shook a bottle of cider vinegar over the top 3 times, no measuring, and let the splash fall through the simmer. The vinegar was not for flavor alone. The acid pulled the calcium out of the leaf in a form your body could absorb, the same way lemon juice does in Mediterranean cooking. By 1992, the dish was banned from low-fat cookbooks. The fat was the problem, the editors said. The fat was the reason families were getting sick. By 2024, the same combination, fat plus greens plus acid, was being recommended in cardiology newsletters as a calcium absorption strategy. The cooking making was not in the newsletter. Her pot did not get cited. 3 centuries of that splash of vinegar in that pot, and the science arrived 3 centuries late. Your aunt still cooks it the same way. Her pot doesn't need a citation. Number 17, dandelion greens salad. Every spring, a woman in rural Tennessee walked the back lot with a paring knife in her apron pocket, looking for the young leaves before they bloomed. She cut them low, washed them in cold water, and tossed them with hot bacon grease, cider vinegar, a pinch of sugar, and a hard-boiled egg crumbled on top. Dandelion greens carry more vitamin A per cup than spinach, plus inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds the bacteria in your gut. The 1980s called dandelions a lawn problem and recommended weed killer. By 2018, specialty grocers were selling the same leaves for $4 a bunch. Jessica B. Harris, the food historian, has written that this is the cycle of African American foodways. What the family ate became what the family was told to stop eating, became what the food world rediscovered, always in that order. The woman in Tennessee never stopped. She kept walking the same back lot with the same paring knife in the same apron pocket every spring for 60 years. Number 16, kale with smoked turkey. A church kitchen in Atlanta in 1962 poured broth over a pile of curly leaves and let them simmer with smoked turkey wings until the fat dissolved into the pot. The greens went onto a long folding table beside cornbread and sweet tea. The supper started at 6. The dishes were washed by 9. Everybody went home full. Kale is a brassica, the same family as broccoli, and the slow simmer makes its iron available in a way a raw salad cannot. For decades, white restaurants put kale beside fish as garnish food. Black church suppers cooked it as a meal. The 2010 wellness boom acted like kale was a discovery. It was not. The supper at the church in Atlanta in 1962 had been serving it for years, with smoked turkey, with cornbread on the side, with iced tea sweet enough to make your teeth hurt. Nothing about that supper has been improved by the wellness industry. The branding has been improved. The food is the same. Number 15, cabbage stewed with neck bones. A butcher in Memphis in 1962 sold neck bones for 19 cents a pound, and most cooks bought them by the bag. A cook carried the bag home in brown paper, tipped it into a deep pot with green cabbage, an onion cut in half, and a spoonful of black pepper. The pot simmered 4 hours. The meat slid off the bone. The collagen melted into the broth and turned to a soft gel as the pot cooled overnight. The same compound that home cooks were pulling out of bones in 1962 is what every collagen powder company now sells in a tub for $40. The pot did the work. The lab took the credit later. She didn't build the children she fed. She just put another ladle on the plate and watched them clean it. Her broth was already what every wellness aisle is now trying to sell back to you. She didn't know to charge for it. Number 14, field peas with snaps. A cook in Lafayette in 1948 stood at the screen door shelling fresh purple hull peas into a wooden bowl, leaving half the pods whole, the snaps. Both went into a deep pot with a smoked ham hock and water to cover. The peas carry 16 grams of protein per cooked cup, plus folate, fiber, and iron. The 1992 USDA food pyramid placed beans low on the chart and pushed bread and cereal to the top. By 2011, the pyramid was retired and replaced because the science underneath it had quietly collapsed. The peas hadn't changed. The chart had been wrong about your grandmother's pot the entire time. Her pot still simmers in her granddaughter's kitchen. The next chart, when it comes, will be wrong about something else. Her pot will still be right. Number 13, chitterlings slow simmered. A kitchen in Charleston in 1968. A woman at the sink with both windows propped open and the back door wedged with a brick. Hog intestines in a basin of cold water and white vinegar, scrubbed by hand for 2 hours before the simmer even began. She turned each fold inside out, ran her thumb down the seam, rinsed, and stacked the clean strips on a wooden board. The smell filled the back porch. The neighbors knew what was for supper before they walked past the gate. After the cleaning came the pot: onion, celery, garlic, a bay leaf, water to cover, 4 hours low. By the time the pot came off the heat, the connective tissue had broken down into something soft and rich, and the kitchen had gone quiet, the work done. White nutritionists in the 1970s called the dish primitive. Modern food anthropologists like Michael Twitty call it one of the clearest examples of nose-to-tail cooking ever practiced in this country. The woman in Charleston cleaned chitterlings the same way her own mother had cleaned them in 1898. Nothing about the food changed, only the fashion around it did. Time after time, the fashion changed and the food was waiting on the other side, the same as it had always been. You can trace the entire history of American nutrition advice through one pot of chitterlings. The pot does not move. The advice keeps moving around it. The pot wins. Every dietary chart written between 1977 and 2010 was written by a committee of people who did not eat from this pot. They wrote about energy intake percentages and saturated fat ceilings. They did not write about the women in Charleston, in Macon, in Memphis, who had been cleaning intestines, simmering bones, fermenting vegetables, and feeding 9 people on $3 a week since before the federal government had a nutrition committee at all. The committees changed every few years. The cooks did not. Number 12, hog maw stuffed. The pig stomach, scrubbed in cold water, stuffed with sausage, diced potatoes, cabbage, and onion, sewn shut and baked low for 3 hours until the casing went tender. Pennsylvania Dutch families made it. So did black families across the Carolinas. The dish put a whole meal in one organ and used every cheap ingredient on the kitchen table. Hog maw is mostly muscle protein with collagen woven through it. The dish fell out of favor in the 1980s when grocery stores stopped carrying the stomach at all. Today, nose-to-tail chefs in New York charge $30 a plate to recreate exactly what a cook in Charleston fed 7 children for under 3. The plate is the same. The bill is different. Her name doesn't appear on any of those restaurant menus. She wrote no cookbook. She just kept feeding her people. Number 11, pickled pig feet. A glass jar on the counter at every corner store in black neighborhoods from Detroit to Houston. Pink brine, white vinegar, peppercorns, and a clove of garlic. The feet were boiled 3 hours soft, then submerged in the brine for a week before they were ready. An old man in Detroit in 1974 walked in on his way home from the night shift, asked the man behind the counter for a pig foot in waxed paper, ate it, standing on the corner before he caught the bus. Pig feet are almost pure collagen, the same structural protein your skin and your joints are built from. The 1990s diet culture treated the food as a punchline. The 2020s wellness aisle now sells collagen powder by the pound for $50 a tub. The protein is the same, the packaging is different. He thought he was buying a snack. He was buying what your vitamin shelf now charges $50 for. He just paid 60 cents. Number 10, oxtail stew. The bony tail of the cow simmered 4 hours with carrots, onion, thyme, and a splash of red wine until the meat slipped off the bone in long strings. For most of the 20th century, butchers in Brooklyn gave oxtail away free or charged pennies. Black households turned it into Sunday dinner. The slow simmer pulled collagen out of the bone and into the broth, the same compound the wellness aisle now sells in tubs at the grocery store. By 2015, restaurants in the same Brooklyn neighborhood were charging $38 for a single bowl. The recipe had not changed. Only who could afford it had. The cook who made it in 1962 knew where the value lived. The market took 50 years to agree. The cheaper a cut was, the more your body needed it. The bones, the connective tissue, the slow-cooked tendons, all of it carrying the structural protein your wellness aisle now bottles. She was buying it for free. Number 9, smoked neck bones with rice. A bowl of long-grain rice topped with neck bones that has simmered 4 hours over celery, onion, and black pepper. The bone broth seeped down into the rice and turned each grain rich with marrow. A Sunday dinner in Mobile, Alabama in 1962 was already what the wellness industry now calls a healing protocol. The amino acids that come out of bones in slow simmer are the same ones probiotic companies now isolate and sell in capsules. The dish was treated as poverty food through the entire low-fat era. By 2024, those same amino acids were being cited in clinical reviews as part of recovery protocols for inflammatory gut conditions. The cook in Mobile didn't write a paper. She did not need to. She just made the pot the way her mother had made it, the way the women before her had made it. The food kept working in your great-grandmother's kitchen, decade after decade, whether anyone wrote about it or not. Number 8, smoked catfish. A man in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1956 caught his catfish in the Yazoo River, smoked them over hickory in a barrel rigged behind his shed, and fed his family for a week on what the river gave him. The fish came out of the smoker bronze and glossy, the skin holding tight to the flesh. He hung them in the smokehouse for another night before the family ate. A 3.5-ounce serving of that catfish carried up to 121% of the daily value for vitamin B12, plus 600 milligrams of EPA and DHA. The omega-3 forms a man in his 60s needed to keep his nervous system steady. The 1980s warned against fried fish and lumped catfish in with fast food. What that warning missed is that smoking is not frying. He was eating exactly what a 2024 cardiology paper would have prescribed. He wasn't waiting for the paper. He was waiting for the river. The river kept delivering. Number 7, pan-fried whiting, a small mild fish that filled paper plates at fish fries from Newark to New Orleans every Friday night. A cook in Harlem in 1971 dredged the fillers in cornmeal, fried them 3 minutes aside in lard, and served them on white bread with hot sauce. The smell of the cornmeal hit the sidewalk before you opened the door. People lined up around the block. Whiting carries lean protein, B vitamins, and selenium. The cornmeal coating adds fiber. The lard, the same fat the food authorities had told the cook to abandon, was 45% monounsaturated. The 1980s food pyramid called the entire plate unhealthy. The components, taken honestly, are now what every modern nutritionist would assemble for a man working a double shift. The plate was never the problem, the labeling was, and the same federal committee that called this plate dangerous was telling families that year to eat 11 servings of bread per day. 11. Same year, same committee. Number 6, bone broth kanji, a pot of pork bones simmered 6 hours over a low burner, then long grain rice added for another hour until the grain broke down into a thick, spoonable cream. A cook in Birmingham ladled it into a chipped white bowl and handed it to a child sick in bed. She had learned the dish from her mother. Her mother had learned it from a neighbor. The broth carries glycine and proline, the amino acids that support gut lining repair. The dish was dismissed in 1990 dietitian columns as old country food. By 2016, it was on the menu at wellness clinics in Los Angeles for $15 a bowl. She was 30 years ahead of the trend. She didn't bill for it. She didn't write a book about it. She just made the pot, ladled out a bowl, and handed it to you when you were sick. Number 5, Hopping John, the New Year's dish of black-eyed peas and rice simmered with smoked pork. A church potluck in Beaufort, South Carolina, in 1959 set out a steaming pot of it on a long table beside greens and cornbread. 3 of the most nutrient-dense dishes in Southern cooking, all on one plate, all dismissed by every 1980s diet column. The combination of legume and grain creates a complete amino acid profile, all 9 essentials in one bowl. 1 cup of cooked black-eyed peas carries 13 grams of protein and 11 grams of fiber. The math on that plate still beats anything on a meal kit website today. And the people who ate it, your grandparents likely among them, lived long enough to see the meal kit websites get rich selling them inferior versions of what they had grown up eating for free. The bowl in Beaufort was already the meal those websites are still trying to recreate. Number 4, black-eyed peas with okra. A cook in Savannah in 1949 dropped sliced okra into her pea pot in the last 20 minutes, just long enough to thicken the broth without losing the snap. The mucilage that thickens the pot is the fiber the gut bacteria feed on. A 2020 paper in food chemistry showed okra polysaccharides act as prebiotic fiber, supporting bifidobacteria and lactobacilli, the same probiotics now sold in capsules. The dish was called slimy by people who never grew up with it. It was actually one of the most carefully built gut-supporting meals in any American kitchen. 80 years before the word probiotic reached the grocery shelf, she was already building one in a black iron pot. The mucilage that visitors found unfamiliar is the same compound a 2024 functional medicine clinic now charges to find in a capsule. It was always in the pod. She knew how to release it. The visitors didn't know what they were missing. Number 3, fermented chow. End of summer. A wooden table on a porch in rural Tennessee in 1944. Baskets of green tomatoes and cabbage and onion and peppers waiting to be chopped. A cook packed the cut vegetables into a stoneware crock with salt and pressed them down with a clean stone, then waited 2 weeks. The lacto fermentation created the same lactobacilli now sold as probiotic capsules at $28 a bottle. A 2018 study found that home fermented vegetables carry live bacteria counts comparable to commercial probiotics. A jar of chow on a wooden shelf in a Tennessee root cellar in 1944 was already that. Nothing has changed about the recipe. The science finally caught up to the canning jar. The same bacteria that wellness companies bottle and sell back to the people whose grandmothers had been making them in crocks for centuries. The bacteria don't care about the bottle. They never did. Her crock didn't need one. Number 2, sweet potato pie. A church supper in Macon, Georgia in 1954 set the pie out beside greens and ham. The orange flesh of the boiled sweet potato had been mashed with eggs and butter and milk and a little sugar, poured into a buttery crust, and baked until the top set into a soft sheen. The pie carried beta-carotene that the body converts to vitamin A, more per cup than any other common American vegetable. The eggs carried choline. The butter carried vitamins A and D. The crust carried the patience of a woman who had rolled dough by hand for 40 years. The 1990s called pie unhealthy and pushed fat-free yogurt instead. That yogurt aisle is now full of added sugar. The sweet potato pie never needed to apologize for itself. The orange-fleshed root that crossed the Atlantic, fed children through the Depression, and became the centerpiece of every black church supper from 1900 forward, never needed a marketing campaign. It just kept showing up on the table. Number 1, buttermilk pound cake, a loaf pan on a kitchen counter in Atlanta in 1962. The cake just out of the oven, the kitchen smelling of vanilla and butter and caramelized sugar. A woman who hadn't measured a thing. Real butter, fresh eggs, cultured buttermilk, sugar, flour, a slow bake at 325. The buttermilk was fermented dairy with live cultures that supported her gut the same way kefir does. The eggs carried choline. The butter carried fat-soluble vitamins. Every Sunday after church, she sliced the cake with a serrated knife and laid the pieces on a chipped white plate. The cake fell out of favor in the 1990s when fat-free baking mixes filled the supermarket aisle. By 2018, those mixes were quietly losing shelf space because shoppers had finally learned to read the ingredient labels. Her cake on her Sunday table in 1962 was simpler, cheaper, and more honest than any factory dessert sold today. She wrote no book. She wrote a recipe card. She tucked it inside a tin recipe box on the kitchen shelf. If you ever find that recipe box on your mother's shelf, hold on to it.
Pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Field green salad was a dish born from foraging, when store-bought vegetables were not available or were too costly. Families would gather wild greens like dandelion, mustard, or pokeweed, clean them carefully, and toss them with vinegar or oil. These greens were bitter, but they were free, nutritious, and available almost everywhere. Field green salad offered vitamins and freshness that was often missing from wartime or depression diets, balancing the heavy starches and salted meats that dominated many meals. For children, it was sometimes an acquired taste, but adults appreciated the practicality of gathering what nature provided. Foraging for greens tied families directly to the land and created a sense of connection to survival practices passed down through generations. Field green salad reflected both hardship and resilience, reminding families that the earth itself could provide when markets could not. It was simple, frugal, and a reminder of the strength that came from resourcefulness.
Preheating low and slow was essential wisdom that separated experienced cooks from beginners in Black kitchens of the 1950s. Grandmothers never rushed their cast iron, understanding that heavy pans needed time to heat evenly across their entire surface. A skillet placed over high flame developed hot spots that burned food in patches. Instead, the pan went over low heat for 15 minutes, the iron gradually absorbing warmth until every inch reached the same temperature. Only then would the flame increase. Children learned patience watching this process. The evenly heated surface meant chicken browned uniformly, cornbread developed consistent crust, and nothing stuck. This technique protected the seasoning too, preventing thermal shock that could damage the finish. The slow approach extended the pan's life across generations. Rubbing butter on minor burns was dismissed by modern medicine before researchers discovered the science behind this African-American remedy. Grandmothers would immediately apply cold butter to small kitchen burns, providing instant cooling relief and creating a protective barrier against infection. While doctors initially criticized this practice, studies have since shown that fat content creates an occlusive layer that locks in moisture and protects damaged skin from bacteria. The cold temperature also provided immediate pain relief by numbing nerve endings at the burn site. This hack was passed from mother to daughter in kitchens where cast iron skillets and wood stoves made burns a common occurrence. Women kept dedicated butter dishes near stoves specifically for this purpose.
Homemade cracklings were a prized treat made from pork skins, fried until golden and crisp. Families would render down hog fat and save the skins, cutting them into pieces that crackled in hot lard as they cooked. The result was crunchy, salty, and deeply flavorful, often eaten with cornbread or sprinkled over greens. Nothing went to waste, and cracklings were proof of how families found ways to enjoy even the humblest scraps. They carried a strong connection to hog butchering days, when entire communities gathered to process a hog and share every part of it. Cracklings added texture and flavor to otherwise plain meals, and for many, they were a reminder of both thrift and celebration. Though inexpensive, they carried a sense of richness and taste that lifted spirits. Homemade cracklings showed how food could be both practical and deeply satisfying, even in the hardest of times. Chinquapin nut cakes offered small moments of sweetness created from the rich forests of the American South. The chinquapin, a dwarf chestnut native to the region, produced small, sweet nuts that could be eaten raw or roasted. Enslaved families collected these nuts in autumn, cracked their shells, and ground the meat into a fine meal. Mixed with a little cornmeal, honey, or molasses when available, the nut meal formed small cakes that were baked or cooked on a griddle until golden brown. These cakes carried both nutrition and a sense of celebration, providing rare treats for special gatherings. The flavor, slightly sweeter than a chestnut with a buttery finish, became a cherished memory passed down through generations. Even after emancipation, chinquapin nuts remained a prized wild harvest in Appalachian and southern communities, though the trees have grown scarce in modern times. Chinquapin nut cakes remind us of the connection between forest abundance and human creativity, transforming a foraged ingredient into a dessert that honored both the landscape and the people who carefully tended its secrets.
African American grandmothers rendered their own lard from pork fat, ensuring purity commercial products cannot match. What was dismissed as backward cooking has been vindicated by nutritional science, proving traditional wisdom was ahead of its time. Salting meat hours before frying was a practice modern cooks abandoned in favor of last-minute seasoning. Yet, African American kitchens maintained this tradition with delicious results. The technique involved generously salting chicken or fish and allowing it to rest for several hours or overnight before cooking. Salt draws moisture to the surface initially, but over time dissolves and is reabsorbed, carrying flavor deep into meat while restructuring proteins for better texture. Scientists call this dry brining, and research confirms it produces juicier, more flavorful results than immediate cooking. The method seasons meat throughout rather than just on surface, eliminating bland bites. Grandmothers knew good fried chicken required overnight preparation, and patience produced legendary results. Applying mayonnaise to remove water stains from wooden furniture was an African American remedy that furniture experts now endorse. Grandmothers would spread mayonnaise over white rings left by wet glasses, cover with cloth, and let it sit overnight, revealing restored wood by morning. Food scientists understand that mayonnaise's combination of oil and vinegar penetrates wood grain, rehydrating dried fibers, while mild acid dissolves mineral deposits. This technique saved countless tables from permanent damage without expensive refinishing. The hack required only pantry staples and patience, making it accessible to any household. Women passed this knowledge through generations, rescuing precious furniture that represented significant family investments. Frying in cast iron instead of non-stick pans was the only option in traditional African American kitchens, and science confirms this was superior choice. Cast iron retains heat exceptionally well, maintaining consistent oil temperature even when cold food is added, preventing greasy results from temperature drops. Heavy pans distribute heat evenly, eliminating hot spots that burn some pieces while undercooking others. Scientists documented that properly seasoned cast iron develops natural non-stick surface rivaling synthetic coatings without chemical concerns. The iron leaches small amounts of dietary iron into food, providing nutritional benefits modern cookware cannot offer. These pans pass through generations, gaining better seasoning with each use. What seemed stubborn tradition was wisdom about heat management.
Bay leaf infusion offered warmth and gentle comfort, using one of the few aromatic plants that grew wild near plantation quarters. Fresh or dried bay leaves were gathered from native bay trees and steeped in hot water to create a soothing tea with a light floral scent and mild medicinal qualities. This infusion was believed to aid digestion and ease colds, and it provided a calming moment during hard days. The knowledge of bay's healing properties came from both African herbal traditions and local indigenous practices, merging into a shared understanding of the land's quiet gifts. Even after emancipation, African American communities continued to brew bay tea for health and hospitality, and its subtle fragrance remains a hallmark of Southern kitchens where bay leaves still flavor soups and stews. Bay leaf infusion stands as a gentle reminder that survival was not only about calories but also about care, showing how enslaved people drew strength and solace from the natural world around them. Crowder pea stew was a variant of black-eyed peas that found its way into countless kitchens during hard years. Crowder peas, smaller and creamier than black-eyed peas, were simmered down with onions, peppers, and bits of smoked meat if any were available. The stew was thick, filling, and high in protein, making it essential for families who needed food that stretched far. Served with cornbread or rice, Crowder pea stew could feed many mouths at little cost. It was one of those dishes that reflected the ingenuity of turning simple legumes into full meals that carried flavor and strength. The stew also tied into a long history of peas as a staple in African and Southern food traditions. Families leaned on it not only because it was affordable, but because it was familiar and comforting. Crowder pea stew was more than food, it was a lifeline and a cultural anchor in times of scarcity. Burdock root stew speaks to the deep botanical knowledge carried by African cooks who could read the land for nourishment even when fields were bare. Burdock, a hardy root with a flavor similar to earthy artichoke, grew wild along fence rows and shaded ditches where other crops refused to thrive. Gatherers dug the long tap roots with simple hand tools, scrubbed them clean, and sliced them thin before simmering them for hours with any garden greens or herbs that might be on hand. The slow cooking softened the root into a tender base for a broth that was both filling and rich in minerals. This practice echoed African and indigenous traditions of using wild roots as a staple during lean times. After emancipation, burdock continued to appear in rural foraging guides and folk remedies, admired for its subtle sweetness and sustaining qualities. Today, herbalists still value burdock for its nutrients, reminding us that what once served as a quiet survival food remains a symbol of resourcefulness and a connection to the untamed landscape of the American South.
These 25 recipes were never the danger. They were the original whole food cooking, dismissed for one decade and rediscovered the next, while a generation of factory food filled the gap in between. Now, I am not a doctor. This isn't medical advice. I'm just looking at how a Southern kitchen actually fed people and what 2026 nutrition research now confirms about the bones, greens, and ferments your grandmother kept on her stove. Tell me in the comments which one your grandmother used to make. I want to know if the lard fried chicken gets more love than the crackling cornbread. The grandmother in Greenville is gone. Her recipe is not. Read her recipe before you read the chart.